Hello, everyone, and welcome to the City Parks Alliance 2018 webinar series. I'm Julie Waterman, and I'm the Advocacy Manager at the City Parks Alliance. We are excited to host this webinar on the Outdoor Recreation Legacy Partnership Program, or ORLP. We would like to thank our partners, the National Recreation and Park Association, NRPA, the Trust for Public Land, TPL, and the National Association of State Outdoor Recreation Liaison Officers, NASURLO, for their assistance in making this webinar a success and for their support of the ORLP program. We would also like to thank and share our gratitude to our guest presenters from the National Park Service, Joel Lynch and Elizabeth Fondriest, who will be giving the main presentation. They will be providing an overview of the ORLP program and the application process. And lastly, we have a couple of folks on the call that can provide technical assistance if needed during the question answer session at the end. Linda Lanterman, the State Liaison Officer for Kansas, and Bianca Schulacher from the Trust for Public Land. Thank you, Linda and Bianca. The Outdoor Recreation Legacy Partnership Program, ORLP, is a nationally competitive urban park grant program funded through the Land and Water Conservation Fund. The program was started in 2014 and offers grants specifically to help underserved communities. For this selection round, a total of $13.3 million of funding is available with a matching grant requirement. The main presentation will last about 40 minutes with 20 minutes left over to answer questions. In order to make sure we can respond to everyone as questions arise, here are some tips. To ask a question, please click the text box underneath Ask a Question toolbar on your GoToWebinar control panel. Simply type the question in the box and click Send. You may send us questions throughout the presentation, but we will be holding them until the end. If you experience technical problems during the presentation, please type it in the question box and send it to us. If you miss something, don't worry. Download links to the presentation and a recording will be emailed to all registrants. Okay then, let's get started. Joel and Elizabeth, take it away.
Well, good morning and good afternoon, everybody. Julie or Sarah, we don't have the control to advance. So could someone advance for us, please? Okay, thank you. Well, good morning and good afternoon and good morning for you, those out west. My name is Joel Lynch and I'll be starting off our presentation this morning. I also want to extend a thanks to our partners on the phone today who also help us answer questions and show our appreciation to City Park Alliance for hosting this call for all of us today. You can advance to the next slide. In terms of objectives, we have a couple that we want to cover today. The first part of our session, we want to touch upon the overarching program, which is the Land and Water State Assistance Program. And as you will hopefully learn that the ORLP program is part of this overall arching program. As we go through this, I'm going to talk about that, and then I'll go into the program goals, the ORLP program goals, its purpose, and then the detail, eligibility, and program implementation. And then I will pass off the baton to Elizabeth, who will talk a little bit more detail about the various selection and ranking criteria, as well as summarizing the application and timeline process. And then all of us will be available to respond to questions at the end of the presentation. And we also have pauses in between major sections to see if there are any questions available at that time. So as I had noted before, there's an overarching program. So the Land and Water program is really composed of these two components. The traditional state formula program, which was originated through the LWCF Act in 1964 and began in 1965. And so we call this the traditional state formula program. This is an important part of, I want to mention this because all the funding and the projects that we'll be talking about under ORLP would also be available for this funding source too as well. So I want to make sure that those that aren't familiar with it understand that these two programs are available for funding for outdoor recreation type projects. And what's important about the traditional formula state program for this year, for fiscal year 2018, Congress has appropriated and we've been allocated approximately $161 million, which will eventually be allocated out to the state. So those funds are also available for the types of projects that we might discuss today. So the component we're talking about today is Outdoor Recreation Legacy Partnership Program, and it began through a congressional directive in 2014. And we worked with Congress and partners at that time in the administration to create a set of grants that are targeted to help urban communities address recreation deficiencies. And we'll get further into some of the details about that. You can advance to the next slide. Okay, so the overarching program. To understand ORLP, you've got to understand really how the Land and Water Program works and its kind of key components. So first, and you'll hear us talk about this throughout the process today, that this is a state and federal partnership. We work closely with the states in implementing this program, and they have a large role in it, as well as the National Park Service. So these are reimbursable grants, and it's a cost share, so at least half of the project would be funded through the federal government, and the other half funded by either local sources or other sources. And these are grants that go to states directly, and then through the states to local units of government. So they're determined as sub-grantees. And the types of projects that are funded under the Land and Water State Assistance Program are acquisition and development of land, and it's for public outdoor recreation. So indoor type facilities are not an eligible entity. To continue the sort of discussion here, so a prerequisite for participation in the program at the state level is that they produce a SCORP, which is a statewide comprehensive outdoor recreation plan. And this is important because even ORLP type projects have to be consistent with that plan. And that plan is really designed to address sort of the needs at that particular point in time, and it sets priorities at the statewide level in terms of the types of recreation opportunities that are needed in that state. Also, as part of this program, there is a requirement that all assisted sites be protected in perpetuity. And so any ORLP project would also fit with under this requirement as well. So the Outdoor Recreation Legacy Partnership Program. A couple weeks ago, we posted the announcement in grants.gov, and I'll draw everybody's attention. So this is www.grants.gov, and the funding opportunity notice is noted there, the P18AS00153. I certainly encourage everybody to go look at the document. There's a approximately 25, 30-page document that provides much greater detail than what we'll get into today. And essentially that is sort of the book or the guidebook, if you will, for what's expected in terms of the application, and also provides additional details. So please take a look at that as you explore the opportunities under this program. So for us, this is the third grant round of the program, and as Julie had mentioned earlier, there's $13.3 million available, mostly from fiscal year 2017 funds, plus some leftover funds from the previous year. We're seeking grants that range anywhere, and this is the federal portion of it, from $250,000 up to $750,000. So as I talked about before, this is matching. So those project ranges are going to be anywhere from $500,000 up to $1.5 million, and certainly there's no cap on terms of the total, but that the funds available at the federal level have to range between $250,000 or $750,000. Also, as part of that announcement, we set the pre-applications are due from the state agency, so our partners at the state level will be submitting on your behalf if you're a local entity by September 14th. And so what's important about that date is they have to submit it by then, but there may, depending on which state you reside in, you may have to seek guidance from the state, because there may be additional deadlines or deadlines before that, so that states can do their evaluation before they submit proposals to the National Park Service. In terms of the program purpose and goals, so as Loie noted here, this is about urban outdoor recreation. So the specifics that we have here are that we're trying to create and reinvigorate parks and other outdoor recreation spaces, and connect and reconnect people with the outdoors, And we're specifically targeting areas where there's lower incomes that are significantly lacking the outdoor recreation resources. And the way we sort of sum this up is we all know in major areas and throughout other parts of the United States that there are gaps where individual neighborhoods or communities do not have recreational opportunities. So the goal of this program really is to help provide opportunities in those types of areas. And so many of you will also be familiar with our program in terms of what we've done in the past 2 grant rounds. And in terms of, this is very similar to those previous grant rounds, but we have updated the program due to the current administration and some of their priorities, and we'll sort of hopefully point out some of those emphasis, and one of which is that last bullet point there, which is a priority of the Secretary of Interior, which is utilizing funds to help create jobs throughout the country.
One other thing I was going to add to that, because this is a question I got, in terms of what represents low income, there's not one sort of guideline for the whole country. This is a relative concept. So how that neighborhood or community fares relative to the larger urban area, and then the county or the state. So it's a relative kind of low income measure.
Okay, thank you, Elizabeth. So in terms of eligibility in our sponsors, so as we noted, this is a program that's geared towards the state and local units of government. So those local units of government can be anything from cities, counties, park and recreation districts, or even federally recognized tribes. Also, the individual nonprofit organizations and other private entities are not eligible as applicants or awardees. However, as part of this, we're testing the notion of public-private type partnerships, and those partnerships and those groups, such as Trust for Public Land, who is also on the phone with us today, are also entities. Those entities are favored in terms of assisting with these type projects. In terms of eligibility, and we'll go and provide example here a little bit later, just to sort of hopefully explain this in detail. In the past, we've gotten most of our questions as it relates to the area about eligibility. So those sponsors, so those either state or those government entities, must have or must be representative of at least a jurisdiction of at least 50,000 and be named or geographically be associated with one of the 497 U.S. Census designated urban areas. And we'll go through an example of that, what that really means. But I will direct you down at the bottom there on Census's website. It provides these maps which go into detail. So urbanized areas in general, for everybody's purposes, is not just a population, it's also a density factor. And again, we'll talk a little bit about that. So those projects, what the goal is to create those recreational opportunities in those specific urbanized jurisdictions. And as you see at one of the bullet points there, the second one from the bottom, it says the projects should be located within or border urban areas. So the ideal would be that the project would be within those urbanized areas, but in the past, and we certainly encourage that if there are projects that are even outside or adjacent to it, that we wouldn't necessarily say that they are not ineligible, but the onus is on the local entity to make the case for how that particular place would serve an urbanized jurisdiction.
And specifically the target community.
And specifically the target community. Good point, Elizabeth. Okay. So as an example of how this plays out in these urbanized areas. So the one we're looking at here is Las Vegas and Henderson, Nevada. And so the green boundary, and this is an official U.S. Census designated area, so that green boundary is in fact everything that's inside that polygon represents that urbanized area. And so even if you look on the edges and the margins, there are places or communities within or cities within that are excluded out that. So that's why these urbanized boundaries are critical to sort of review to see where things are. I'll also point out that there's as I mentioned, it's not just about a population, it's also about density. So some of those areas that you're looking at now, you might see white areas. Those are areas that would, in theory, be excluded. They're inside the boundary, but they're sort of excluded because it doesn't reach the population density prescribed by U.S. Census's methodology. So you can see, you probably can't read, but to the communities to the north, Las Vegas, it represents about 600,000 people. Henderson, down in the lower right-hand corner, represents about 265,000. North Las Vegas is also around 225. But then you also see there's a census-designated place. So this is an unincorporated town that's within the county, and it's a census-designated place, so it's not necessarily called out as a specific city. But that also has a population of 225 or 220,000 roughly. And then there are other places, particularly down to the south. There's Enterprise, Nevada, Spring Valley are some other examples that have populations that are over 100,000. And those are unincorporated parts of the city that are part, or of this urbanized area that are part of Los Angeles Township. So those are eligible entities unto themselves because they represent the population base, but also because they reside within that urbanized areas. But then I'll also point to what you'll see in yellow down at about 4 o'clock, and it's the community of Whitney. And it's an unincorporated town within the county, and it only has a population of 38,000, roughly 40,000 individuals. So as an example that we're looking at here, that community of Whitney wouldn't necessarily be an eligible entity because it does not meet that 50,000 threshold population. So again, it's the communities that can apply. We're encouraged to certainly review what's under the census information in terms of how they fit within that, particularly locations of any project type areas.
The only thing I'll add to that is there's 2 states for which we make an exemption for that, and then one is West Virginia and the other is Vermont, because those states do not have any cities of 50,000 or more. So we would take whatever the largest city is of the, they do have urbanized areas, so whatever the largest city is of that urbanized area, that one would be eligible.
Okay. So we mentioned earlier this is a state program, so this all really does start with our state partners. And in many cases, some of those states, because this is our 3rd round, have made their own announcements. They might have even made it previously with the anticipation that we would be releasing the announcement later on, as we've done a couple weeks ago. And so this is where to start to find the process. And when usually what I do to encourage folks, if you don't know who at your state level administers the Land and Water Program on behalf of everybody, usually the easiest thing I tell folks is type in Land and Water and whatever the state is in a Google or web browser, and usually within the top 5 searches, you're going to find that entity. It could be in the state park system, could be in community development as part of the state government, it could be other places, but you'll find not only just the information about the program within the state, but more importantly, the contact information associated with it. So the LWCF state lead agencies are responsible for soliciting and ultimately selecting and then submitting to the National Park Service up to 3 proposals. And so as a reminder again, so that their responsibility is to get this to the National Park Service on that September 14th deadline. So states will probably likely have deadlines that precede that deadline so that they can do whatever work they need to do. And I'll also point out that this year, unlike the previous grant rounds where we only had 2 proposals from each state, we've increased it this grant round to hopefully get more projects. We certainly know that there are more projects out there. Also, the states play a crucial role once projects are selected by submitting the final project application. And so individual states would be then working with any state out there, or any city out there as a subgrantee to submit any of the final paperwork on your behalf and also administer the program from a reimbursable standpoint. So now the role for the National Park Service is, in terms of Elizabeth and I are considered the competition managers, and our responsibility not only in working through the criteria and defining the elements of the program, but also to organizing that evaluation panel, which is generally going to be, at this point, comprised of federal and non-federal professionals that represent different elements of a particular project and different skill sets, so that there's wide skill sets to make proper evaluations. And that role of that panel is to score and ultimately rank those proposals, and then that scored ranking list is then submitted to the Director of the National Park Service, who ultimately selects the projects for this program. So we wanted to take a pause here and see if there were any questions. I know this is a lot of information to present in a short amount of time, and we want to make it certain that we gave people time to respond when they had their questions. Okay, so we're not seeing any questions pop up, so we'll continue to move on, and I will now pass the baton to Elizabeth to take a deeper dive into the criteria and process.
Okay, so we wanted to talk a little bit more about the project evaluation. This is fairly similar to how it was in the 2016 competition. Projects can score up to a total possible 100 points. We have the four main criteria, which are really about the sort of the goals of the project and how they relate to the program. That's sort of 60 possible points, and then the remaining 40 address the technical merit and the qualifications of the applicant, including any partners, and then also a section on the actual sort of finances and budget of the project, including the potential leveraging presented by the project. So this is that's the same as it was previously. However, within that, things have changed just a little bit, mostly on the second criteria, as Joel was sort of mentioning earlier. But the first criteria, improving physical and recreational access and addresses a recreation deficiency, that's still one of is the key criteria. So looking for communities that are very underserved with respect to park and recreation resources, meaning that they have no park resources currently, or an inadequate number, or what they do have is maybe really out of date. The facilities might be old, obsolete, unsafe. So doing a major overhaul of the park to bring it up to sort of today's standards, offer more opportunities, that would also count sort of similarly to just a totally brand new park. So that's a consistent criteria from over the three competitions. The second criteria is one where things have changed a little bit. So as Joel mentioned earlier, the target community, there's a big focus on economics this year. So communities where there are large populations of low-income individuals. So this is the target community that should benefit from the project. We're also looking in this area for projects that have the ability to create jobs, new jobs. This can include both short-term, construction type jobs, if it's a development project, but also potentially permanent new jobs. So if it is a brand new park and recreation area, presumably there will need to be new sort of park managers, new maintenance jobs. A rehabilitated park might offer the opportunity for new jobs related to park programming, things like that. So the potential of the park to offer new employment is also something that applications should talk about, and sort of so much the better if the immediately surrounding community that is low income would be able to directly benefit from this as well from an employment standpoint would be good. The last piece of it also is economic benefits that might be generated outside of the park. So for example, if redeveloping this park so that there is more usage means that adjacent local businesses, maybe nearby restaurants, that kind of thing, then benefit because more people come to the park and then want to go eat after their kids' baseball game, that kind of thing. that's also a way to get points for this criteria. One thing I want to qualify about this again is this is economic development outside of the park. We are not looking to support projects that are economic development inside of the park. As Joel mentioned earlier, the Land and Water Conservation Act does have its permanent protection for outdoor recreation. While it's not to say that you can't do anything in the park that makes money, that's really not a primary purpose of our program. So projects that, maybe proposed to redevelop a building inside the park so you can offer, food concessions, that is not going to be considered eligible. So this is, we're looking for economic benefits outside of the park. So that's really the only criteria that's really different from prior ones, but it's public engagement. So looking for support for the project from the community, including their involvement in planning for the site. So what kinds of recreation facilities that they wanted, sort of support from the community, things like that. Meetings that might have been held, opportunities for people to submit suggestions, all of those things. So how did you engage your community and generate local interest and support for this project? The fourth criteria is innovative and transformative attributes. So this is kind of a wild card area, looking for really a range of things like that would make your project stand out from others. So this can be anything from potential, revitalization aspects for the neighborhood. Maybe it's adaptive reuse of a formerly developed site that's, just been sitting there unused. Those kind of maybe sort of unusual features. So this is kind of a way to sort of play up some unique aspects of your project. Yeah, it's stuck again. Oh, there it goes. Okay. All right. Moving on to the technical merit section. So as Joel mentioned earlier, all LWCF and ORLP projects have to align with the state's comprehensive outdoor recreation plan. So looking for descriptions of how this project helps advance goals of the SCORP. The readiness of the project. So projects that are sort of further along in their planning, ready to sort of break ground or pretty close to it, maybe following some immediate permitting, but pretty much clear on what they're going to do. Those kinds of projects will do better than, something that's still sort of very far back in the planning stages, maybe not having even started yet. Applicant and partner capacity. So applicants will describe their experience managing park systems, maybe doing projects of this type. If there are other partners, this is where you would talk about them and their roles in the project. And also in this section, the commitment to the permanent outdoor recreation provision and what ability you have to, so operation and management resources to make sure that the park can continue to be maintained over the long term. So there's a lot of different pieces covered in that one. And then in the last section, the financial support and leveraging. So we are going to be evaluating the project's budget. So the budget narrative section should describe the cost of the project. So what kinds of things will be funded, the basis for the cost that you're requesting. Those will all be reviewed and evaluated. Another big piece of this is where your cost sharing is coming from and whether or not it actually exceeds the one-to-one. The Land and Water Act, as Joel said, does require a minimum of one-to-one. If the project actually exceeds that share, so something like 75-25, for example, you can get points for that. We're also looking for diverse sources of support. So if the project's match comes from a mix of the sponsors' dollars, but as well as contributions from private entities, maybe local community groups, things like that, so that so there's sort of a diverse range of sources and not just coming from the sponsor. That is also something that you can get points for. I think. There was supposed to be a question slide there. But anyway, okay. All right. So in terms of putting together the application itself, there are the standard forms, government standard forms, the SF 424, which is the standard application form, and then the standard form SF 424C, which is the construction project. This will depend a little bit on the state. They may seek to have the applicants or sponsors fill these out, or they may fill them out themselves, but they are required elements of the application. The project narrative is a key component, and this is a place where we really want people to go and look at the notice of funding opportunity. Pages 11 to 14 is where this is all detailed. But their proposed outline is an introduction to the project, what it will actually do, who it will benefit, things like that. And then sort of walking through the different evaluation criteria. So making sure that for each of the things you're going to be rated on, which I just discussed, that you actually talk about that relative to your project. So in the project narrative piece, that's going to be the first two sections, so the program purpose and then the qualifications of applicants will be in the first section, and then separate from that will be the budget, and I'll talk about that in a moment. But making sure that that your application narrative is responsive on each point is really important. We do include a suggested length, target length for at least for the project narrative piece. This is about 10 pages. This is in part to facilitate the review that, our review panel has a lot of applications to get through. So having really lengthy applications is not necessarily helpful. But also just to reduce effort on the part of the sponsors. I mean, it's not really worth, writing up 40 pages of stuff if it's not going to get reviewed or just it's too hard for people to work through. So we think that this is about the right length for people to convey enough information about the project to be understood, but not be excessively lengthy. People are allowed to submit sort of additional attachments in support, but I would sort of keep it very focused. I think in the last round, we got one application that was included about 600 pages of additional documents, including all sorts of plans and, the local government's, meeting notes and all this kind of thing. There's no way that, that the panel can go through something like that. So if you're going to say submit additional information, I would, limit it to the actual maybe sort of pages of a plan that address the project or sort of tie to it rather than the entire plan. I'll also note that grants.gov has a limit of 25 megs of application material actually forward. So if you don't want it to get lost in the system, it also is not, I would keep it on the smaller side. Okay, and then the budget narrative suggested page limit is 5 pages, including any tables. And as I said, you want to make sure that there's sufficient detail here for the reviewers to understand the basis for the cost that you're requesting. So, break it all down in terms of, everything from materials to labor, things like that, whatever it is. I mean, we understand that they're estimates, but you should explain how you came up with the cost. It shouldn't just be lumped numbers. And you want to be sure to make really clear what the grant funds will actually be used for, and what the match will be paying for, and then any other costs that are, if they are above and beyond what those are paying for, just to kind of help with the scoring. This is particularly important when if your proposed project is maybe part of a much larger effort. Sometimes we get projects that are, maybe they're looking for $750,000, and that's part of a $10 million project. But the narrative is really not broken down in a way that makes it possible for us to discern, or for the reviewer to discern, what it is you're actually seeking the money for. And this can be risky, especially if larger projects start to delve into other kinds of maybe redevelopment elements that are not eligible for our program. If we can't figure out what it is that you want the money for, we can't score it. And also, you run the risk of including something that's ineligible, which may mean that we have to reduce costs or just determine that that the project isn't actually viable because we can't isolate the land and water piece. So, so make sure that your budget makes really clear what it is you want the grant money for. Okay, and then the last couple pieces, project location and site maps. So certainly maps that show the area, the community that will be served, where the site is going to be, you know, and also put that in relation to any other park resources in the area. So if you're trying to make the case that, you know, the community is underserved, you want to show that there's nothing else around, or at least a good distance away. The other thing is there should be a close-up map of the site itself, and it should show the proposed boundary of the project. So this is a key thing. This was something that got missed a couple times last time. So make sure that your site map does have a boundary on it, or a proposed boundary on it. And if you have them available, things like site plans, stuff like that, can be included in this area. And then in the notice itself, there are other things that if the application is selected to submit a complete and final application, there are additional documents that you will have to provide. So just keep in mind that if your project is selected does not mean you are done. You will work with the states to develop these other pieces. So there are so the additional supplemental documents, which are sort of standard kinds of things that go along with land and water applications from the formula program. Those are all things that will ultimately be required. Oh, and sorry, I think I forgot to mention, the other things that you can include are letters of support. You know, so for example, the community groups, if you want to substantiate that kind of support for the project, but that's fine. But anything that you want to include, it should come in with your application. A lot of the time we get letters of support that come separately, sometimes much later than the application deadline. If things have already gone to the merit reviewers, like we can't, you know, keep handing stuff out. So if you want things to be considered, they've got to come in with your application. And the last thing that people, you know, applicants tend to include is site photos. So, you know, so maybe the existing park site, if you're wanting to substantiate its need for a substantial overhaul, things like that, or maybe just a potential area. Those can all be helpful to the reviewers to put your project in context.
Thanks for that great presentation, Joel and Elizabeth. We will now open the session to questions. You've all been very busy sending in questions during this webinar, so let's jump right in. As a reminder, please be sure to send in your questions via the questions box on your GoToWebinar control panel at any time. So the first question, are the census urbanized areas new for 2018? And is there an example of a project that exists outside the border of an urbanized area?
No, so we are still relying upon the urbanized areas that were established in 2010. So you should go and look at the census's website to see the list. We also posted on the grants.gov page. There is a copy of the Federal Register notice, which did list all the urbanized areas. But you actually have to go to the census website to see the map. And in terms of projects that are outside, I think we've had one or two where the park itself was maybe abutting the urbanized area, which is not necessarily a surprise because it is density driven. So sometimes the urbanized area boundary gets drawn around it. I don't think we've had any yet where the park was away from the urbanized area. I know we've gotten a couple of applications in that regard, but I don't think any have been funded yet. And I think this was something that Joel mentioned earlier. You know, sort of proximity and kind of ability to serve the neighborhood is really key. So if your site is somewhere away from the community, you have to talk about how the target community can get there. So, you know, having a poor, you know, or lower income neighborhood in the center of your city, you know, and a park 25 miles away, like, we need to know how they're going to go, or the reviewers need to know how they're going to get there. Like, is it accessible by transit, you know, whatever it is. But it's hard to make the case that that community is served if it's not obvious like how they get there.
Great. Question 2. So with the city, who will implement the project? Will implementation of the project be a subgrantee to the state LWCF?
Yeah, so the state is awarded the funding, and they in turn make a subaward to the local sponsor. The local sponsor actually does, manage the project, but with kind of oversight from a grant management standpoint from the state. So they handle or kind of make sure that the reporting happens, and then when it comes time for reimbursement, the sponsor submits its expenses to the state, who then in turn requests the funding from the Park Service.
Great. Does the city have to have ownership or an agreement to purchase the land before it can qualify for application?
Well, for an acquisition project, I mean, we wouldn't expect obviously the land to be owned yet, but it would be a good idea if there was a contract or sort of a purchase and sale agreement in place, sort of substantiating that the acquisition is likely to happen. I think for a development project, already owning the property would be key. And it does have to be the land has to be publicly owned by the sponsor.
Okay. Are cities that were awarded the last round eligible to apply for a different project in this round?
We don't prohibit that. Some states as part of their sort of review and selection process do have criteria about, that a grantee can't have a grant when they've already got one. But that will depend on the state. But we are not expressly prohibiting it for ORLP purposes.
Okay. Another question, should there be community engagement in advance of submitting the application?
That would be ideal if you want to score well on that criteria.
Okay. Another question, can funds be used to develop design documents for projects, complete environmental remediation, or acquire necessary permits for construction?
We do allow such costs to be included, but there are funding limits. So 10% of your overall budget for design and engineering, and I think 10% for, what's the other piece?
10% for overruns or?
Oh, yes, thank you. 10% for contingencies.
Okay. Another one, what kind of documentation will be allowed to demonstrate matching contribution? Does the money already have to be allocated, secured? Does this need to be the money last in?
The money should be at least committed. The sponsor doesn't necessarily have to have it in hand, but they should be able to demonstrate that it's been promised to the project, at least within the one-to-one. So the matching funds already have to be in hand. If the project is overmatching, the overmatching funds don't necessarily need to be in hand yet, but you would get more points if you already had them versus if you're still out there looking for, for other funding. If you don't have the funding yet, it sort of calls into question whether or not you will be able to complete the project as scoped.
Okay. Another one, can the project be a linear park? For example, a greenway that connects community to a park?
It could be. I don't think we haven't funded anything like.
We did
we did?
There was one of the projects in the first grant round that was somewhat of a linear park that I believe connected two areas and helped create opportunities in between.
Which one was that? But so it is theoretically eligible, but that's those kinds of projects can be a little bit tricky for boundaries and things like that. So, for example, if the point of the project is to help, to buy land to connect to recreation areas, then you probably need to commit the adjacent park areas to the boundary if that's the point of the project. Like, we're not going to allow you to put a boundary only around the connection and not the parks that the connection is intended to serve.
Okay. Another one, does the project need to be at a single site or can it include multiple sites undergoing a common improvement?
Don't think we funded anything like that. They could theoretically be eligible. I think that one might have difficulty scoring in terms of sort of implementation and kind of so obviously adding sites kind of adds to the complexity of the project. So it sort of may call into question like how viable it is if you're, trying, creating one part can be hard enough, never mind sort of multiple ones. So that one might just give reviewers a little bit of pause.
Yeah, and I would add, the emphasis are the ideal, the highest score, or the ideal project is addressing that need. I mean, if there's multiple needs in terms of multiple communities or multiple neighborhoods that have that need, and you're creating those new opportunities, sure. But I guess if a project is really just a rehabilitation of existing park or recreational opportunities in areas that it might not necessarily be, addressing the core goals of the program as well too. So
yeah, that's true. Like if you were rehabilitating 3, but only really 1 met the target community, that probably wouldn't rank that well.
Right, exactly.
Got it.
I wouldn't say no, but it's just that one might be a challenging one for reviewers to score.
Okay. This person just wants to be sure this grant opportunity is for shovel-ready projects exclusively. I think that depends on what does shovel-ready mean, since this can take some time for the money to be doled out, right?
Well, I mean, a lot of projects are. I think we want them past sort of the planning stage. Certainly, I mean, sometimes the permitting process might still be ongoing. I think part of it is, if it is shovel ready, that's obviously good. But I think the bigger concern is if it's really just sort of starting out, like maybe a community, like they bought a piece of property that's going to become a park, but they have no idea yet, what's actually going to be in it. That would be a hard one for reviewers to evaluate, because I think they want to see what kind of benefits are going to be there, what kind of what will be on offer to the community, and also you can't really budget for something if you don't know what you're going to put in the park.
If the project includes outdoor recreation items that cost, say kayak rentals or zip lining, will those be considered ineligible? Is there a revenue threshold?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
Oh, like a maximum amount of money.
Or the match part?
Yeah, I'm not sure.
For the economic impact, kind of stuff, I would imagine is what we're responding to.
Okay, we'll go on to the next one. For communities with less than 50K population, not in West Virginia or Vermont, what programs might be suggested through NPS?
So as Joel talked about at the very beginning, I mean, the ORLP is an offshoot of the larger Land and Water Conservation Fund program. So every state gets each year an allocation of funding from the Land and Water Conservation Fund. This year, a total of $161 million is going to get divided among all the, the 50 states and the territories in DC. So those funds are available through the states. Usually there's annual or maybe every other year competitions, and any sort of outdoor recreation project that has no sort of restrictions on who can, the size of communities that can apply.
And that is the only other program within the National Park Service that's available for public outdoor recreation purposes.
Mm-hmm. Okay, another one. Are you aiming for geographical distribution of the grant funds across the country?
That would be optimal. It'll be interesting to see what happens this year with allowing up to 3 applications per state. I think it's something that will be looked at. I mean, if the scoring sort of works out, and we can fund a diverse geographic suite of projects, just based on the ranking, that would be great. It could be that if among the top sort of scoring projects when the fund's available, there's a limited number, it's sort of dominated with multiple projects from a few states. We do say in the funding notice that the director has the discretion to select out of order to kind of be able to diversify the geography of the project list. But hopefully it wouldn't play out that way.
Okay. And another one, how will reimbursements be handled for overmatched project 50%?
So if the project is proposed at a different kind of cost share, that's the way the grant will be set up. And then the reimbursement is done kind of in relation to that. So if the matching, was actually put forward at 25.75, then that's the way the reimbursement would happen.
Okay, this is an interesting one. Do the jobs created need to be for low-income individuals or jobs for anyone?
I mean, jobs for anyone would be a starting point, but I think if the case could be made that that some of the jobs would benefit the people in that community, then that probably would get a better score.
And can the project be a community design playground development project?
Playgrounds are eligible, but that would be a very expensive playground.
Right. Let's see, there was a point made about not being able to have economic impact within the park. So would outdoor recreation items that collect fees for participating be considered ineligible? I think that goes back to our previous question.
Right. No, it's not. I wouldn't say that you can't do things that don't make money, but we did get a couple projects in previous rounds that were really, so one wanted to rehabilitate this a building that was in the park specifically to set up a food concession. So that's really not the kind of thing we're looking for. The recreation, the actual recreation facilities, not maybe that kind of support. And in general, sort of like indoor facilities aren't, apart from things like, bathrooms, I mean, that kind of, maybe sort of changing rooms for pools, I mean, that kind of thing is the more typical indoor thing that we find. But we're not looking to, fund a structure
that creates a farmer's market or something like that.
Okay. Is the match part specific to one project, or could we have 2 different parks that qualify? Kind of went through that before. Sounds like one project is better.
I think I would sort of treat that like a multi-site. I mean, with the cost sharing on, I wouldn't put one forward where, the park was, the grant funds would be for one park and the match was improvements at another park. We wouldn't, so the 6F, I mean, part of that has to do with the, the 6F restrictions. Like, we can't restrict a site that we don't actually put money into. So you can't use that as match if we haven't spent money there. So it would be better to cost share on both, on both sides.
Okay. What role does racial equity play in the evaluation criteria?
That is not one of the criteria.
Okay. Could improvements to an existing park, like improved green infrastructure, stormwater management with an educational component, be eligible?
I don't say that it's sort of not eligible, but it's not really the point of the project. I mean, we're looking to sort of, the project should create recreation opportunities for people, so to give that, so that they can actually go out there and use it. So other kinds of improvements to parks, that maybe indirectly benefit the public, but aren't aren't for them to play on. That's not really the purpose of the program.
Okay. And is funding only permitted for infrastructure-related costs, or could a portion be used for programming?
Programming is not an eligible expense. It definitely has to be infrastructure.
Okay. Let's see. Can you speak to the timing of when the money will be available, when reimbursement period is expected to be? But sounds like we kind of covered that a little bit, but you can speak to that maybe one more time.
Sure. So the applications, as I said, are due September 14th from the states. We are hoping, fingers crossed, to get through the review process and be able to make a preliminary announcement by March 1st of 2019. After that, I mean, as we've said, the states and the local sponsors will need to work together to submit an actual application. This is just a sort of a pre-application or pre-proposal. So a full application has to be developed. So that will really kind of depend on how quickly the applicant and state can work together to sort of make that happen. Theoretically, given the timing of the fiscal year and the funding cycles, if people were really on the ball, it would maybe be possible to get an application in within that next couple of months, say by the end of July, which would allow the applicant, allow for award, say by October 1. But that will really depend. I mean, just to put it in perspective, I mean, even now, we made the announcement on the last competition, I guess last year around this time, right? And there's still about 4 applications that we're missing. So it can take a while depending on the project. So, actually, can you go back one slide? One more. Okay. I think that was the one, the common problems one. That was actually something we've talked a little bit about this, but let me just sort of go through this quickly. We did want to highlight some of the things that we have seen in past grant rounds that have proved problematic for the applications, resulting in either the project being eliminated entirely, or else just sort of achieving such a low score that it really couldn't be considered eligible for funding. So one of the key things to start out is just making sure that your application is complete, so that so the project has, the application has all of the mandatory elements as listed in the funding notice, and also responds on all the major criteria so that they can actually be scored. One other thing that we included in the on the grants.gov page is a checklist. It's in the supporting documents to try to help people make sure that their application has all the elements it's supposed to have, and each section sort of touches on the things that it needs to. But when information is missing, that tends to be detrimental to the project scores. Budget lacking detail or including ineligible costs. This is a key one because we have definitely eliminated applications in both rounds because of this. The LWCF prohibits any other federal funding from being in the project. This is actually in the law. So even if there's enough match or whatever, it doesn't matter. There can't be other federal funds. There is an exception to this for a couple programs where their authority allows them to be used as match. Community development block grants is an example, but otherwise, generally speaking, there should be no other federal money in your project, and so that's been a problem. The other thing the LWCF Act prohibits is acquisition support costs, so things like appraisals and stuff like that. So don't include those. If you do include those, we have to sort of reduce your funding request to take those out. Ineligible sub-grantees, as Joel mentioned, so only public agencies, so a sub-applicant that's a nonprofit, that will cause the project to be eliminated. And then just, again, not really being responsive to the purposes of the project. We're looking for, projects that benefit low-income communities that lack resources. So, other kinds of underserved communities that are not low-income, not responsive to the purposes of the competition. And then the last thing is just sort of the unclear elements in projects. I mean, sometimes, especially in kind of bigger things, or bigger projects, it's sort of hard to discern what the LWCF aspect is. Reviewers have a hard time with these. So the more, it's fine if the project is part of a larger program and you can talk about that, but make sure that the LWCF piece is very clear, and also make sure that the area to be assisted is very clear. Sometimes, projects come in and, even with maps and sort of people are like, well, where's the park, or where's this work actually going to be done? And you can't tell. So just, make sure that your proposal is easy to understand.
Okay, all of that great information. I'd like to thank our participants for joining us today and for giving an excellent presentation on the ORLP. City Parks Alliance with its partners NRPA, TPL, and NERSURLO are really excited about this new urban park funding program. If you have additional questions, you can email info@cityparksalliance.org. Just a few items. Within the next week, you'll receive an email with a download link for a copy of today's presentation. And next, be sure to check out City Parks Alliance's webinar series on equity and funding. In June, our webinar will dive into campaigns that have successfully funded city park maintenance and operations. And lastly, please take a minute to fill out the very short evaluation that will pop up after the session concludes. And thank you again all for joining us, and thank you for your dedication to improving urban parks.